Good evening everyone, and thank you so much for watching the first ever episode of Murder at Bedtime with Lyndon. Now tonight, this is the case of Tom Otter and the murder of Mary Kirkham and their unborn child. I've always wanted to research this case as it is part of Lincolnshire folklore, and I lived in or very close to all the settings. So let's get started. Thomas Otter was christened at Treswell Notts on the 3rd of March 1782. The son of Thomas and Anne. Now I only mention this because of a couple of facts. One, Thomas uses the alias of his mother's maiden name, Temporal, when he goes to live in Lincoln. And the other thing, his mother was 51 years old when she gave birth to him, which is rare even now. He married a Martha Rawlinson in 1804, and in December of that year she had a daughter, Mary. He travelled to work in Lincoln in 1805. Now we don't know if he had abandoned Martha or was going to return, but he found work as a canal banker, a labourer on waterways, under the name Thomas Temporal. He was described as 5'9", stout and good looking, but also as vengeful and cruel to animals. In fact, there was a story that at one time he cut the eyes from an ass, made 2 incisions in the animal's rear and inserted the eyes while the ass was alive. During this time, according to newspaper reports, we find that he became criminally intimate with a young woman. Now, I tried all I could to find out what that actually means, but I'm afraid I couldn't. But she proving pregnant, and after questioning by the parish council, who told them Tom was the father. Then they in turn arrested him and gave him the choice of going to prison, paying the parish council £40, the equivalent of over £3,000 today, or marrying the young woman. This was known as the Bastardy Act. Tom chose the latter, and he was imprisoned for 2 days prior to the wedding, so he couldn't do a runner. So Tom was brought to South Wycombe Church by 2 constables on Sunday the 3rd of November 1805 to marry Mary Kirkham of North Wycombe in what was known in those days as a knobstick wedding. Mary was around 8 months pregnant. Now, I lived and went to school for 11 years in North Wycombe and worked for 2 years after I finished school in South Wycombe, so I know those places quite well. Now, the facts are, at this time, Mary's dead body was found in a ditch at Drinsey Nook on the Sunday morning, the day after the wedding, by locals Daniel Fletcher and Thomas Bowker. A blood-soaked hedge stake was found nearby, plus 2 bundles of clothing and a woman's pattern, a type of wooden slat shoe protector. Now, so what happened? Well, you know, it's a long time ago, so things get a bit murky and mixed up. But I do believe that some of the people who have written about this case in the past aren't local to the area, and I will try to explain why. It is said after the wedding by some reporters that Tom and Mary spent the afternoon drinking in the Sun Inn in Saxilby, and afterwards started walking towards Tom's home in Lincoln. Firstly, why would you get married, then walk 11 miles to have a drink? Because you would have to walk 11 miles back. This is because the site of the murder is in the opposite direction to Lincoln and back towards South Wycombe. So it looks to me like they got married. Then Tom must have murdered Mary before they got to Saxilby on the way to Lincoln. Hence the 2 bundles of clothes. She was moving to his house to start a new life with his baby. But this doesn't tie in with what the witnesses said. They said they saw Tom and Mary crossing Saxilby Bridge towards Drinsey Nook, where the murder took place, and not towards Lincoln. I was then further confused by the evidence of a John Dunkley. Now this is bizarre. I assumed he gave this evidence at the trial, as no one had written differently. He said, on the evening of the murder, he had been drinking at the Sun Inn and was making his way home to Donington, which is the opposite direction to Lincoln. Some people told him they had seen Tom and Mary further down the road. Now, I've no idea why they would tell him that or anything, just the fact that maybe they knew he was a right weirdo, which will all become apparent now. Anyway, he quietly caught them up and hid in the bushes. He could see them quite clearly in the moonlight. He said he heard Tom say to Mary, "Let's sit and rest for a while." He then says he heard Tom say to himself under his breath, "This will be the end of my marriage now." He then pulled a huge hedge stake 2 feet out of the ground and beat Mary's head to a pulp with it. Now, in Dunkley's words, he passed out, and when he regained consciousness, Tom had gone. He then, for reasons only known to himself, touched the stake and got blood on his smock. He was so afraid he would get blamed, he didn't report it and disappeared out of the county until Tom was arrested. Now, for quite a while, I thought that's done and dusted. Then it gets a little bit more dodgy, because I suddenly find out, right at the end of my research, that the evidence given by Dunkley was not given at the trial, but was given some years later on his deathbed to a clergyman. Now, you can understand, all of a sudden I got a bit excited. I thought maybe I can prove Tom didn't do it and get him a pardon. Unfortunately, no proof of this man ever existing has ever been found, and it just may have been made up by one of the 2 newspapers who were sensationalising the story at the time, trying to get more readers. Shame that. Anyway, back to the facts. Thomas, later that day, on the Sunday, was arrested in the Packhorse Inn in Lincoln High Street and escorted back to Saxilby to the Sun Inn, where the village had all their inquests. So in front of the coroner, the 20 village jurors and Mary's body, Thomas was found guilty of wilful murder and sent to Lincoln Castle to await trial at the March Assizes, which was in 4 months' time. Mary was immediately taken from the inn and buried in St Botolph's Church in Saxilby. Tom's trial on the 12th of March 1806 only lasted 5 hours. 20 witnesses were called, but they only really saw Tom walking with Mary over Saxilby Bridge, which I still can't understand. The jury took only 3 minutes to find Tom guilty. He was condemned to hang and then to be dissected. But before the execution, Baron Graham, for some reason, the judge changed his mind and decided that dissecting was too good for Tom Otter and changed it to gibbeting at the scene of the terrible act. Now, gibbeting was regarded as the ultimate humiliation for the body of the executed person, as you weren't buried in consecrated ground, so most God-fearing people were more scared of this than anything. Tom Otter was hanged outside Lincoln Castle walls at noon on Market Day, March the 14th, 1806, to guarantee a nice large crowd. He would have stood on the back of a cart, had the noose put over his head, then the horse would have been smacked on the rear to move on, leaving Tom to strangle very slowly. Sometimes loved ones of the condemned would hang off their legs to try to lessen the suffering and quicken the hanging. This is where the term hangers-on comes from. Tom, unfortunately, had no hangers-on. The gibbeting took place on the 24th of March 1805, 10 days later, as that's how long the blacksmith took to make the chains, because, of course, the judge changed his mind, so the chains hadn't been ordered. It's believed a huge crowd waited for the cart that brought Tom Otter's chained corpse to Saxilby Moor on a cold, windswept day. The gibbet cage was hosted 30 feet on a pole, close to the site of the murder, and a fair took place. It was reported that fiddlers, drinking booths, fortune tellers and performers were on the site for a week. Tom Otter's remains and the gibbet stood for 45 years and finally blew down in a storm in 1850. Most of it was lost or the wood was stolen, but some leg irons, which I have actually seen, and the head cage, which I haven't because you have to see it by appointment only, can be seen at Doddington Hall. In my opinion, Tom Otter most probably did murder his wife and unborn child, and was in some stories a pretty evil guy. But I do think if you take away the so-called confession he made to the prison chaplain on the day of the execution, the evidence is very circumstantial. He may have got away with it today. What do you think? Some other interesting stories to do with Tom and Mary are as follows. It is said that while Thomas's gibbet was being raised, it fell and killed one of the people helping to hoist it. Mary's blood dripped onto the mountain steps of the Sun Inn pub, and for many years after could not be washed off with anything. Now, even though it's been done up and everything, and in the 19th century, one thing that actually still is there outside the Sun Inn is the mountain steps. And the last thing is the hedge stake. The hedge stake that was used in the murder was stapled to the wall in the Pie Wipe Inn. But every year on the anniversary of the murder, it would somehow find its way back to the field where Mary died. And in the end, the Bishop of Lincoln burnt it in the cathedral grounds. Now, that's the end of our story, and I hope you've enjoyed listening tonight as much as I've enjoyed researching and telling the tale. Please do give me your feedback, good or bad, it all helps. And if you did enjoy it, see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very, very much. Night, night.